Linda's dream had always been to feed people. It was a pure, uncomplicated, and deeply generous ambition that had been the central, defining feature of her personality for the 50 years I had known her. My dream, in contrast, had been to stop people from getting food poisoning. For 35 years, I had been a public health inspector for the city of Chicago. My world was one of sanitation codes, of bacterial cultures, of the quiet, almost invisible systems that keep a city, of millions from succumbing to a wave of salmonella. Linda was the poet of the kitchen. I was the unglamorous, unthanked, and deeply necessary prose. We were an odd couple, a friendship forged in the crucible of a shared working-class Chicago childhood, and we had remained against all odds, the central fixed points in each other's lives. So when she called me, her voice a breathless, triumphant symphony of joy, to announce that she had finally done it, cashed in her husband's 401k, taken out a second mortgage on her house, and opened her own restaurant at the age of 55, my first feeling was one of profound, almost maternal pride. My second, a secret professional reflex I had spent a lifetime trying to suppress around her, was a quiet, creeping dread. Linda's heart was pure gold, but her kitchen habits, I knew from a lifetime of shared potlucks and holiday dinners, were a chaotic, improvisational, and deeply hazardous work of art. The restaurant was called Linda's Kitchen. It was a small, charming, and impossibly expensive bistro she had opened in a trendy, up-and-coming neighborhood on the West Side. The reviews from food bloggers and local magazines in the first month had been ecstatic. They had praised its homespun authenticity, its cozy, rustic charm, and its unpretentious, heartfelt cooking. I knew what that meant. It meant the decor was lovely, and that Linda had charmed the pants off of them. It told me nothing about the state of her walk-in refrigerator, my husband. David and I made a reservation for a Friday night, a month after she had opened. I was determined to go, not as an inspector, but as a friend. I would eat her food. I would praise her courage, and I would keep my professional opinions for the first time in our long friendship to myself. It was a promise I was, as it turned out, completely incapable of keeping. We arrived to a scene of cheerful bustling, and to my trained eye, deeply alarming chaos. The restaurant was beautiful. Linda had a wonderful eye. It was a warm, inviting space, with mismatched wooden tables, soft, glowing lights, and walls covered in charming, folksy art. It was also, I noted, with the first familiar pang of professional anxiety, dangerously overcrowded. There were at least 60 people packed into a space that I would have estimated had a legal capacity of no more than 4, a clear fire code violation. I took a deep breath and forced it from my mind. I am not on the clock, I told myself. I am a friend, here to be supportive. Linda rushed to greet us at the door, enveloping me in a huge flour-dusted hug. She looked exhausted, her face flushed with the heat of the kitchen and the adrenaline of a busy service. But she was beaming. She was radiant. "Maggie," she cried. "You're here. Can't believe it. What do you think? Isn't it wonderful?" "It's beautiful, Linda," I said, and it was the honest truth. Absolutely beautiful. She led us to our table, a small two-top that was, unfortunately, situated with a perfect, clear, and utterly damning view directly into the open kitchen. It was a modern, trendy design, the kind that is supposed to convey a sense of transparency and honesty. For Linda, it was a catastrophic self-inflicted wound. She had, in the name of style, provided a front-row seat to the horror show of her own operational incompetence. For the first 10 minutes, I tried. I really did. I focused on my husband. I commented on the charming, rustic decor. But my eyes, my traitorous, professionally trained eyes, kept getting drawn to the scene in the kitchen. And with every glance, another small, ugly, and deeply dangerous health code violation would reveal itself. I saw a young, overwhelmed line cook, his face slick with sweat, wipe his nose with the back of his hand and then, without washing, plunged that same hand into a large bowl of salad greens. It was a direct textbook violation of Section 2 to 301.14 of the FDA's Food Code, a perfect vector for the transmission of staphylococcal bacteria. I saw another cook, a girl who couldn't have been more than 19 working the grill station. She was using the same pair of tongs to place raw, uncooked chicken breasts on the grill and then, a moment later, to flip a beautifully cooked medium-rare steak. A classic amateur and deeply dangerous case of cross-contamination. I tried to look away. I really did. I picked up the menu, a beautifully designed but absurdly ambitious document. It was 4 pages long, with over 60 different items, ranging from Italian pasta to Thai curry to classic American meatloaf. It was a menu written by a dreamer, not a professional chef. No small kitchen could possibly execute a menu of this size and diversity with any degree of quality or safety. It was a logistical impossibility. "What looks good to you, honey?" David asked, his own eyes blissfully unaware of the microscopic war that was likely being waged on every surface of the kitchen behind him. Before I could answer, our server arrived. She was a sweet, cheerful, and completely, utterly untrained young woman. She placed our water glasses on the table, her fingers wrapped firmly around the rims from which we were supposed to drink. She used the same damp, gray-looking cloth to wipe a sticky spot off our table and then to wipe a piece of food off the seat of a neighboring chair. My mind, a relentless, unasked-for calculator of bacterial load, went into overdrive. "And for a little treat while you're looking at the menu," the server said brightly, "Linda has a small complimentary salad bar for all our guests." She gestured to a small refrigerated unit in the corner of the dining room. It was another charming, rustic, and deeply, deeply alarming feature. Small self-service salad bars are a notorious minefield of food safety issues. I watched as a small child who had just been picking his nose with a singular, focused intensity happily served himself a large handful of croutons. I excused myself to go to the restroom. A journey that took me, as I knew it would, directly past the salad bar. I had, out of a 40-year habit I could not break, a small pen-sized and perfectly calibrated digital thermometer in my purse. As I passed the salad bar, I stumbled slightly, my hand accidentally brushing against the container of creamy Caesar dressing. The thermometer, which I had palmed, made contact for a brief 2-second reading. I looked at the number under the dim romantic lighting of the dining room. 55 degrees Fahrenheit. The official legally mandated danger zone for foodborne bacteria is between 41 and 135 degrees. The creamy egg-based dressing was a ticking, salmonella-laced time bomb. I made it to the restroom, my heart pounding, and I splashed cold water on my face. "This is not your job anymore, Margaret," I told myself sternly. "You are retired. This is your friend's dream. Just eat the food, smile, and tell her it's wonderful." But I knew, with a sinking professional certainty, that I could not. I was not just a customer anymore, I was a witness. A witness to a pattern of negligence so profound that it was not just a matter of a bad meal. It was a matter of public safety. When I returned to the table, I had made a decision. I would order the most simple, most well done, and most theoretically safe item on the menu. "I will have the meatloaf," I said to the server. "Well done, and a bottle of beer." Not a glass, sealed bottle. The meal, when it arrived, was a perfect reflection of the chaos I had witnessed. My meatloaf was cold in the center. David's fish was both overcooked and underseasoned. We pushed the food around our plates, my appetite and my spirit completely gone. And then, at the end of the meal, Linda herself appeared at our table. She was beaming, her face full of a proud, hopeful, and completely oblivious joy. So she asked, her eyes shining, "What do you think? The truth? Isn't it just wonderful?" I looked at my best friend of 50 years. I looked at her. Beautiful, charming, and deeply, profoundly dangerous restaurant. And I did the only thing I could do. I lied. "It's a beautiful space, Linda," I said, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. "You have worked so hard. You should be so proud." It was a weak, evasive, and deeply cowardly response. But it was the only one I had. To tell her the truth, here, in the middle of her dream, would be an act of unimaginable cruelty. We left soon after, and as we walked out of the warm, noisy, and bacterially compromised restaurant, back into the clean, cold, and blessedly sanitary air of the Chicago night, the full weight of my predicament settled over me. "How bad was it?" David asked, his voice a low, worried murmur as we walked down the street. I thought of the raw chicken. I thought of the dirty cloth. I thought of the 55-degree Caesar dressing. And I delivered my final professional and deeply, deeply troubled diagnosis. "It was," I said, my voice a quiet, horrified whisper, "the single most dangerous restaurant I have seen in my entire 35-year career." I looked at him, my eyes full of a new and a terrible certainty. "She is going to kill someone," I said. "And I, God help me, am the only one who knows it." Sleep, that night, was a battlefield. I was a combatant in a war against my own memories, my own training. Every time I closed my eyes, I was back in Linda's kitchen, but I was not seeing a charming rustic bistro. I was seeing a landscape of invisible threats, a microscopic horror show playing out in plain sight. I saw the cheerful, untrained server, her hands a traveling circus of bacteria, moving from a dirty tabletop to the rim of a clean water glass. I saw the raw chicken on the green cutting board, a pale, glistening vector of salmonella, its juices, seeping into the wood, waiting for the fresh, innocent lettuce that would follow. I saw the creamy Caesar dressing, a placid, ticking time bomb of staphylococcal bacteria warming itself to a perfect, procreative temperature under the romantic dim lighting of the dining room. For 35 years, I had been the city's immune system. My job was to identify and neutralize these threats before they could bloom into a full-blown public health crisis. My brain was a finely tuned instrument, a complex and deeply ingrained algorithm for identifying risk, and every single blaring alarm in my professional soul was screaming at me. The restaurant was not just a potential problem, it was an outbreak in waiting. Sometime around 3 a.m, a ghost from my past, a memory I had not visited in over a decade, decided to pay me a visit. It was the summer of 2010. A heat wave had settled over Chicago, a thick, suffocating blanket of humidity. I was a senior inspector at the time, and we had received a handful of scattered, seemingly unconnected reports of food poisoning. A few people with salmonella, all of them having eaten at different restaurants in the Lincoln Park neighborhood. It was a statistical blip, not yet a cluster, but I had a hunch. I spent a day going over the case files, looking for a common thread, and I found one. All 4 of the victims had, on the day they got sick, also attended the same large outdoor neighborhood festival. I went to the festival's permit application at the Department of Public Health. I looked at the list of approved food vendors, and then I cross-referenced that list with the restaurants the victims had eaten at. There was no overlap but of food. Festival is a chaotic, fluid ecosystem. I knew that the official vendors were only half the story. I spent the next day on the ground, walking the neighborhood, talking to people who had been at the festival. And I heard a story from a young mother whose child had gotten sick, about a charming, unregistered vendor who had been selling homemade artisanal chicken salad sandwiches from a small refrigerated pushcart. The hunt began. It took us 2 days to find him. It was a culinary school dropout who was trying to make a name for himself, selling his gourmet sandwiches at street fairs without a license. We found him in the kitchen of his small, illegal catering operation, which he was running out of the basement of his apartment building. The scene in that basement has been burned into my memory forever. It was a vision of pure, unadulterated, and deeply ignorant negligence. He was making his chicken salad in a single, massive, unchilled plastic tub. He was using the same unsanitized wooden spoon to mix the salad and to taste it. The temperature, In the center of the tub was 62 degrees. It's a perfect, warm and happy incubator for a bacterial bloom of epic proportions. The outbreak, in the end, had sickened over 80 people. 12 of them, mostly children and the elderly, had been hospitalized. And one of them, a 72-year-old grandmother who had just been visiting her family for the weekend, had died. Her body, weakened by a pre-existing condition, had simply not been able to fight off the infection. I had been the one to interview the young man, the chef. He was not a monster. He was a fool. He had wept through the entire interview. "I didn't mean it," he had sobbed, over and over. "I was just trying to make good food. I was just trying to follow my dream." He had a dream. And his dream, his beautiful, unregulated, and deeply, deeply negligent dream had killed a grandmother. I woke from the memory with a start, my heart pounding, the ghost of that young man's weeping a fresh, raw wound in my mind. Linda was not a monster. She was my friend. She was just a woman trying to follow her dream. But the universe and the remorseless, unforgiving laws of microbiology did not care about her intentions. It did not care about her dream. A foodborne pathogen does not distinguish between a malicious act and a well-intentioned, but ignorant one. The result is the same: sickness and sometimes death. I looked at the clock. It was 5 a.m. My decision was made. I sat with my husband, David, in our quiet kitchen as the sun came up. I told him everything I had seen: the cross-contamination, the temperature violations, the profound systemic incompetence. And I told him about the ghost, about the salmonella outbreak, about the dead grandmother. "What do I do, David?" I asked, my voice a raw, pleading whisper. "If I tell her the truth, the full, unvarnished inspector's truth, I will destroy her, her dream, her life's savings. It will all be gone, and our friendship will be gone with it." "And if you don't tell her?" he asked, his own voice quiet and full of a deep, sorrowful understanding. "Then I am complicit." I said, "Then I am a silent, knowing accomplice to the next outbreak. Then the blood of the next victim, the next child, the next grandmother, it will be on my hands too." "You have to tell her, Maggie," he said finally, his hand covering mine on the kitchen table. "You have to trust her. You have to trust your friendship. She is a good person. And a good person, a true friend, would want to know the truth. No matter how hard it is to hear, he was right. I had to believe he was right." I waited until late that afternoon, until after the chaos of the weekend lunch service would be over. I sat at my kitchen table, the same table where I had once helped her study for her high school algebra exams. "And I dialed her number," she answered, her voice a breathless, exhausted but happy sigh. "Maggie? Hi. Oh my God, it was so good to see you last night. The place was packed, wasn't it? It was a madhouse." "It was, Linda," I said, my own voice a careful, gentle thing. "We're packed, and the room is just beautiful. You should be so proud of what you've built." I had to start with the truth, with the praise she so deeply deserved. "Thank you," she gushed. "It's a dream come true. It's a complete and utter nightmare, but a dream come true." "Listen, Linda," I began, my heart pounding. "Calling as your friend, as your oldest and dearest friend. Because I love you, and I want your dream to succeed more than anything in the world. And because of that, I need to be honest with you about a few things I saw last night. Few simple, operational things that I think could help you." The cheerful energy on the other end of the line immediately cooled by several degrees. "Oh," she said, her voice now a little more guarded. "Kay, what is it?" I took a deep breath. And then, as gently, as compassionately, and as professionally as I could, I began to walk her through the litany of her own failures. I started with the front of house. I talked about the chaos at the host stand, about the undertrained server. I tried to frame it all as a solvable problem, a simple matter of a better training protocol. She was quiet at first, just listening, a series of non-committal who's on the other end of the line. Then I moved to the kitchen, to the more serious, more dangerous issues. Linda, I said, my voice as soft as I could make it. I was sitting with a clear view of the kitchen line last night, okay? And I saw your grill cook, the young man with the tattoo on his arm, using the same pair of tongs to handle raw chicken and a cooked steak. Honey, you know you can't do that. That's a critical violation. That is how people get desperately, desperately sick. Maggie, you don't understand how hard it is back there, she said, her voice now defensive, a sharp, irritated edge creeping in. It was a busy night. Things get a little chaotic. I'm sure he washed them in between. You're exaggerating. Nobody got sick. Not yet. I said, you were lucky. And then there is the matter of the salad bar. Told her about. The temperature of the dressing, I explained in simple, clear terms. The science of bacterial growth. No? The concept of the temperature danger zone. For God's sake, Maggie, she snapped, her voice now full of a righteous, indignant anger. It's a salad dressing. You sound just like you did when you were on the job. You're not my inspector anymore. You are my friend. I am trying to be your friend. I pleaded, my own voice rising. A friend tells the truth. A friend does not let a friend poison her customers. Linda, you are my oldest friend in the world, and I am telling you with all the love in my heart that your beautiful, wonderful restaurant is a public health hazard. You have to make changes. You have to hire an experienced kitchen manager. You have to train your staff. I have to, what? She cut me off, her voice now a low, furious hiss. I have to listen to you come into my dream. The dream I have worked for my entire life, and tell me that it's a failure. I have to listen to you, my best friend, the one person I thought would be in my corner, and have you tell me that I am going to kill someone. Yes, I cried, my own voice now full of a desperate, pleading urgency. Because you are. You are. You know what, Maggie? She said, her voice now as cold as the grave. I have had enough. I am 55 years old. I have sunk my entire life savings into this place. I am working 20 hours a day. I am drowning in debt, and I am, for the first time in my life, happy. And I will not let you, with your pessimism, with your rule books, with your endless, joyless obsession with what could go wrong, ruin this for me. She took a deep, shuddering breath, and she delivered the final friendship ending blow. I don't need a health inspection from my best friend, Maggie. I need a friend. I need your support, not your criticism. So if you can't be happy for me, if you can't just come in and eat the food and tell me it's wonderful, then just don't say anything at all. She hung up the phone. I sat in my quiet kitchen, the dial tone a shrill, buzzing testament to the catastrophic failure of my mission. I had tried to be the friend. I had tried to be the mentor. And I had been rejected. She had not just dismissed my advice. She had dismissed my entire life's work, my entire professional identity, as a pessimistic, joyless obsession. And she had, with her final, furious words, given me a terrible and a deeply unwanted choice. I could be her friend, which meant being silent, which meant being a willing accomplice to her negligence. Or I could be the one thing I had spent my entire life being: a health inspector, a guardian of the public trust. My friendship with the woman I had known for 50 years was over. That was a fact. But my duty, my profound and my deeply professionally ingrained duty to the innocent, unsuspecting people who were, at this very moment, eating her 55-degree Caesar dressing. That duty was not, and I knew, with a cold, hard, and deeply sorrowful certainty, what I had to do next. The dial tone that followed Linda's furious disconnection was the sound of a 50-year friendship being executed. I stood in my quiet Chicago kitchen, the receiver still pressed to my ear, and I felt a profound and a deeply sorrowful sense of failure. I had tried to be a friend. I had tried to be a mentor. And in return, I had been branded a pessimistic, joyless, and unwanted inspector. She had not just rejected my help, had rejected our entire shared history, reframing my professional expertise not as a gift, but as a character flaw. My husband, David, who had been a silent witness to my side of the disastrous conversation, came and put a steadying hand on my shoulder. "You did what you had to do, Maggie," he said softly. "You told her the truth. The rest is up to her." "But she didn't hear it, David," I said, my voice a hollow whisper. I finally placed the receiver back in its cradle. "She didn't hear a word I said. All she heard was an attack on her dream. She is standing in the middle of a burning building, and she is angry at me for pointing out the smoke." That night, I was haunted by the ghosts of my old career. I saw the faces of the victims from the Lincoln Park salmonella outbreak, the grieving family of the grandmother who had died. I saw the tear-streaked, uncomprehending face of the young chef whose dream of selling chicken salad sandwiches had turned into a nightmare of involuntary manslaughter. Linda was not him. She was not a careless, arrogant boy. She was a good, kind, and deeply overwhelmed woman. But the bacteria, the tiny, remorseless agents of my lifelong professional dread, did not care. Salmonella does not distinguish between a well-intentioned dreamer and a negligent fool. I lay awake, the moral calculus of my situation a grinding, impossible equation in my mind. On one side was my loyalty to Linda, a bond forged over a half-century of shared laughter, secrets, and sorrows. On the other was my quiet, solemn, and deeply ingrained duty to the public, to the hundreds of innocent, unsuspecting people who were, at this very moment, happily making reservations at her charming, beautiful, and dangerously unsanitary restaurant. What do I do? I whispered into the darkness of our bedroom. David's voice, a calm, rational anchor in the storm of my anxiety, came from the other side of the bed. "You did your duty as a friend, Maggie. You warned her privately and with love. She rejected it." He paused. "So now you have to decide if your duty as a citizen, as a professional, outweighs the cost of what is left of your friendship." He was right. Linda had made it clear. She did not want a friend who was an inspector. She did not want an inspector who was a friend. She had forced me to choose which role I would play. And in doing so, she had made the choice for me. My friendship with Linda was a personal matter. The public's health was not my decision. When it finally settled in the cold, pre-dawn hours, was not an act of anger. It was an act of profound and deeply sorrowful resignation. I could not, in good conscience, do nothing. But I could not yet bring myself to make the official call, to sign my name to the complaint that would bring the full, crushing weight of the city's health department down upon her head. That felt too much like a betrayal, a final personal execution, so I chose a middle path. A last-ditch, desperate, and anonymous shot across the bow. I would not be the inspector. I would not be the friend. I would be what she had, in her anger, accused me of being a critic, a single, anonymous, and deeply dissatisfied customer. I would post a public warning, and I would pray to a God I wasn't sure I believed in that she would be wise enough to listen. I spent the next morning in my study, a place of quiet, methodical work. I was not a woman acting on an emotional whim. I was a professional preparing a report. I began by creating my anonymous persona. I created a new Google account, its name a masterpiece of digital blandness. Chi_diner_67. I did not add a photo. I did not add any personal information. I was a ghost in the machine, a disembodied voice of public concern. I then navigated to the Google page for Linda's Kitchen. The 4.6-star rating glowed on the screen, a monument to a lie. I clicked the button to write a review. My first draft was a product of my own raw and deeply personal hurt. It was an angry, emotional tirade. My oldest and dearest friend has opened a restaurant that is a complete and utter disaster, I began. I wrote about her dismissiveness, her pride, her refusal to listen to reason. I wrote, in short, as a betrayed friend. And after 10 minutes of this cathartic, furious, and deeply satisfying typing, I deleted every single word. An emotional rant is easily dismissed. It has no credibility. My review could not be about my feelings. It had to be about the facts. It had to be cold. It had to be clinical. And it had to be, above all else, undeniably true. I began again. This time I wrote not as Maggie, but as Chi_Diner_67. I gave the review a simple and a deeply damning title. A beautiful room, a worrisome experience. I started, as any fair critic should, with a compliment. I had to establish my credibility as a reasonable, objective observer. My husband and I were so excited to try this charming new addition to the neighborhood, I wrote. And we were not disappointed by the room itself. Linda's kitchen is, without a doubt, a beautiful, warm, and inviting space. The decor is rustic and charming. And it is clear that a great deal of love and attention has been paid to creating a wonderful, cozy atmosphere. We wanted so badly to love this place. Now that I had established myself as a reasonable and well-intentioned customer, it was time to introduce the evidence. I would not use the technical, jargon-filled language of an inspector. I would translate the violations into the simple, relatable language of a concerned diner. I began with the service. Unfortunately, the charm of the room was immediately undermined by a sense of chaos at the front of house. We had a reservation, but still had to wait for nearly 30 minutes in a crowded doorway, and the host seemed completely overwhelmed. Our server, while very sweet and friendly, was clearly undertrained. She was unable to answer basic questions about the menu, and we noticed her on more than one occasion, wiping down tables with a cloth and then immediately handling clean silverware and glasses without washing her hands. For a restaurant at this price point, these kinds of basic service and hygiene lapses are, frankly, unacceptable. Next, the most dangerous and the most difficult of my observations: the food safety issues. I had to be specific, but I also had to be careful. We were seated with a partial view of the open kitchen. And I must admit, some of the practices we observed were a cause for concern. We witnessed one of the line cooks using the same pair of tongs to handle what appeared to be raw chicken, and then a moment later, a cooked steak that was being plated. I am sure it was just an oversight on a very busy night, but for anyone with a basic knowledge of food safety, this is a significant and worrying example of potential cross-contamination. I then moved to the salad bar, the ticking time bomb of my previous visit. The restaurant offers a complimentary salad bar, which is a lovely touch. However, on the night we visited, we were concerned that many of the cold items, particularly the creamy dressings and the potato salad, were not being held at a safe temperature. They were, to be frank, lukewarm. We and several other diners we observed were hesitant to try them for this reason. This seems like a simple, but a very critical detail to overlook. I had presented the two most critical violations I had witnessed not as accusations, but as the concerned anecdotal observations of a fellow diner. It was a quieter and, I hoped, a more effective way of sounding the alarm. Finally, I concluded with a summary that was both a condemnation and, I hoped, a final, desperate plea for her to wake up. Overall, Linda's Kitchen is a restaurant that has a great deal of heart, but it is being let down by a profound lack of professional operational polish. The passion is there, but the systems are not. It feels like a kitchen and a staff that are overwhelmed, undertrained, and in desperate need of experienced leadership. I am truly, deeply rooting for this charming neighborhood spot to succeed. But until these very serious issues of service, hygiene, and food safety are addressed, I would be hesitant, and I would advise others to be hesitant to return. I finished. The review was a perfect and a perfectly devastating piece of prose. It was honest. It was fair. It was unassailably true. And now, for the final, brutal, and most necessary act, my cursor hovered over the 5 empty stars. My finger trembled. To give a 1-star review to your best friend's lifelong dream? It was a cruel act, a betrayal. But to not give a 1-star review, to not sound the alarm in the clearest, most unambiguous way possible, was to be a silent accomplice to a potential tragedy. To the ghost of the grandmother in the Lincoln Park salmonella outbreak, I thought of Linda's angry, dismissive words, "I don't need an inspection, Maggie. I need a friend." And I knew what I had to do. The greatest and the most difficult act of our long and complicated friendship. I clicked the first star. I took a deep, shuddering breath, and I hit post. It's the review. My quiet, anonymous, and deeply, sorrowfully necessary warning to the world was live. I closed my laptop. I did not feel triumphant. I did not feel vindicated. I felt like I had just performed a painful but a necessary surgery on the person I loved most in the world. An amputation, to save her from a disease she had refused to see. I had done it, and now all I could do was wait and pray that the patient and our friendship would somehow, against all odds, survive. I posted the review, and then I did the hardest thing I have ever had to do in my life. I walked away from my computer. I did not check it for the rest of the night, did not check it the next morning. For a full 48 hours, I existed in a self-imposed state of digital ignorance. I did not want to see the immediate aftermath. I did not want to watch the digital bomb I had so carefully, so sorrowfully constructed detonate. I gardened. I read. I went for long, quiet walks with my husband, David. I tried with a desperate and a deeply unsuccessful effort to pretend that I was not a woman who had just, with a single anonymous click of a mouse, declared a quiet, brutal, and public war on her best and oldest friend. The quiet, of course, could not last. By the 3rd day, my own morbid professional curiosity, the instinct of an inspector who needs to see the results of her own report, became too strong to resist. With a sense of profound and a deeply apprehensive dread, I sat down at my desk and I opened my laptop. I navigated to the Google page for Linda's kitchen. The change was immediate and catastrophic. The beautiful, glowing 4.6-star rating was gone. In its place was a sickly, failing 2.7, and my review, the one I had posted under the anonymous, gender-neutral moniker of Chi_Diner_67, was no longer a lonely, single star. It was at the very top of the page, propelled there by a staggering number of helpful votes. It had become a lightning rod dot, and underneath it in the comments section was the evidence of the digital wildfire I had started. My review had not just been a warning, it had been a call to arms for every other dissatisfied customer who had been silenced by the restaurant's initial manufactured hype. Thank you, Chi_Diner_67. The first comment read, "I thought I was crazy. We ate there 2 weeks ago, and my son was sick for 2 days afterwards. We just thought it was a stomach bug, but now I'm not so sure. The food was definitely not hot. The service part is 100% accurate," another wrote. "Our waiter spilled a glass of wine on my wife's dress and then seemed to blame us for it. The management is a complete and utter joke. I worked in the kitchen there for the first 2 weeks, a third anonymous comment read, and this one made my blood run cold. I quit because the head chef is a screaming maniac and the owner has absolutely no idea what she is doing." The cross-contamination this reviewer is talking about is not an accident. It is the standard operating procedure. I saw things in that walk-in refrigerator that would make your hair turn white. This place needs to be shut down before someone gets seriously hurt. On and on they went. a chorus of confirmation, a public airing of 100 different grievances. My single, quiet, and factual review had opened the floodgates. And a torrent of public anger and disgust was now pouring into the beautiful, charming, and deeply, deeply flawed restaurant my friend had built. The story, of course, did not stay on the Google reviews page. A few days later, it was picked up by a prominent and a notoriously vicious local food blogger. I read his post with a feeling of detached, almost academic horror. He had taken my review and the subsequent comments, and he had woven them into a brutal and a deeply entertaining narrative. The headline of his post was Heart and Soul and Salmonella: The Curious Case of Linda's Kitchen. He did not just critique the food. He critiqued the entire feel-good, woman-following-her-dream narrative that Linda had so successfully sold to the city. He wrote about the dangers of amateur, underfunded, and overly ambitious restaurateurs. He framed Linda not as a plucky, heroic dreamer, but as a dangerous, incompetent amateur who was a threat to the city's public health. He reprinted my entire anonymous review, calling it a masterpiece of quiet, damning, and deeply professional prose. And he ended his post with a single, devastating, and deeply prophetic question. With a start this disastrous, the only question left for Linda's Kitchen is not if it will close, but when the Chicago Department of Public Health will close it for them. I read the blog post and I felt a profound and a deeply sorrowful sense of a tragedy that was now moving under its own unstoppable momentum. I had started this. I had, with my single anonymous review, set a fire. And now, the fire was raging out of my control. I knew with a sick certainty that Linda would be reading these things too. I imagined her in her small back office, the office she had been so proud of, watching the dream she had invested her entire life's savings in, the dream for which she had sacrificed her oldest friendship, die a slow and a very public death. And I knew with an even greater certainty that she would be trying to figure out who Chi_Diner_67 was. I imagined her reading my review over and over, the specific, professional, and deeply familiar phrases beginning to echo in her mind. Systemic failure, a fundamental misunderstanding of hospitality, a failure of leadership. These were not the words of a random angry customer. These were the words of a mentor. These were the words of a teacher. These were my words. The phone call, when it came, was not a surprise. It was an inevitability. It was a week after my review had been posted. A week of watching her restaurant's online reputation be systematically and brutally dismantled. I was in my kitchen, preparing a simple, clean, and deeply sanitary salad for my lunch when my phone rang. Her name flashed on the screen. I took a deep, steadying breath, and I answered. The voice on the other end was not the voice of my friend. It was the voice of a wounded, cornered, and deeply dangerous animal. I know it was you. Maggie, she whispered, and her whisper was more terrifying than a scream. Linda, I began, but she cut me off. Don't you dare, she hissed. Her voice a low, trembling wire of pure, unadulterated, venomous rage. Don't you dare pretend you don't know what I am talking about. Chi_Diner_67. Did you really think I was that stupid? Did you really think I wouldn't recognize your voice? Your cold, clinical, and deeply, deeply judgmental prose? I have been reading your words my entire life, Maggie. I know them better than I know my own. I tried to tell you, Linda, I said, my own voice quiet. I tried to warn you. Warn me. She shrieked, and the raw, untamed fury in her voice was a physical blow. You did not warn me. You executed me. You hid behind a fake name, like a coward, and you went online, and you gutted me. You took 50 years of our friendship, and you used it as a weapon to destroy my life. Was this what you wanted all along? Was this your plan? To watch me fail? To be the one who could stand there and say, "I told you so." "No," I cried, my own voice now rising, the injustice of her accusation cracking through my carefully constructed calm. That is not what this was. "I called you, Linda. The very next day, came to you as your friend, and I begged you to listen to me. And you told me I was a pessimistic, joyless old woman. You told me I was not your inspector. You told me that if I couldn't be supportive, then I should just be silent. You did not want my help. You wanted my complicity. And that is the one thing I could not give you. So you decided to destroy me instead?" She sobbed, her rage now collapsing into a messy, hysterical grief. "You are a monster, Maggie. A bitter, jealous, and lonely old woman who cannot stand to see anyone else be happy. You could have just let me have my dream, but you couldn't do that, could you? You had to take it, and you had to smash it into a million pieces. Your dream was a public health hazard, Linda." I shouted, my own voice now a raw, desperate plea for her to understand. "Your dream was a salmonella outbreak waiting to happen. This was never about my jealousy. This was about an innocent child not ending up in the hospital because you were too proud and too cheap to properly train your staff and to properly refrigerate your damn potato salad." "Get out of my life, Maggie," she whispered, her voice now a dead, hollow thing. The fight completely gone, replaced by a cold and an eternal void. "You are not my friend. You are not my sister. You are a poison. You have destroyed everything I have ever loved. I tried to save you, Linda." I wept, the full, tragic, and unbearable weight of our broken friendship crashing down upon me. "No," she said, her voice a final, quiet, and utterly unforgiving whisper. "You just saved yourself." She hung up the phone. I stood in my silent, sunlit kitchen, the dial tone a shrill, meaningless scream in my ear. It was over. The friendship, the 50-year foundational and most important friendship of my entire life, was gone. It had been killed in the end by a lethal combination of her own willful blindness and my own terrible and deeply necessary clarity. I was not the asshole. I knew that in the cold, hard, and logical part of my soul. I had done the right, the responsible, the only thing I could do. But as I stood there alone in my quiet kitchen, the ghost of my best friend's voice a fresh, raw wound in my heart, I had never in my entire 67 years felt more completely and more utterly alone. And I knew that my work, my sad and my necessary work, was not yet done. The anonymous review had not been enough to save her from herself. Now I would have to do the one thing I had been so desperately trying to avoid. I would have to save the public from her. The silence after Linda hung up the phone was a different kind of silence than the one that had filled my house before. It was not the quiet of a peaceful retirement. It was the dead, hollow silence of a 50-year-old bridge being blown up. The sound of the explosion so immense that it left only a ringing void in its wake. Our friendship was over. I was a monster, a villain, a backstabbing traitor who had, in her jealousy, destroyed her friend's dream. That was her truth. That was the story she would tell. I stood in my kitchen for a long time, a dead phone still in my hand, and I felt the full crushing weight of her final words. It's a part of me, the part that was still the little girl who had grown up with her. The part that remembered scraped knees and shared secrets and a lifetime of laughter was heartbroken. I had lost my oldest and dearest friend. But then another part of me, the part that had spent 35 years walking into the back kitchens of 1,000 different restaurants. The part that had seen the horrifying microscopic consequences of a single careless mistake began to assert itself. It was the cold, professional, and deeply, righteously angry part of me. The inspector, she had not just rejected my friendship, she had rejected my expertise, okay? And in doing so, she had made a conscious, deliberate, and deeply arrogant decision to continue to endanger the public. She had looked at the loaded gun I had shown her, and she had chosen, out of pride and denial, to keep it pointed at the heart of the city. My duty as her friend was over. She had officially, and with great dramatic flair, fired me from that position. But my duty as a citizen, my lifelong, sacred, and deeply ingrained duty as a guardian of the public health, was not. What now? David asked, his voice a quiet, gentle presence in the wreckage of my heartbreak. Now, I said, my voice anew, and a terribly unfamiliar sound of pure, cold, and quiet resolve. I do the job I was trained to do. The decision was not an easy one. It was an act of profound and a deeply personal violence. I was about to become the instrument of my best friend's professional destruction. But the memory of the grandmother and the salmonella outbreak, the ghost of every innocent victim I had ever seen in a hospital bed because of a careless chef or a negligent manager, was a weight far heavier than the ghost of my dead friendship. I knew what I had to do. I did not act in the heat of the moment. I waited. I gave it a week for my anger to cool, for my personal hurt to subside, to ensure that my final, irrevocable act was not one of personal revenge, but one of pure, dispassionate, and professional necessity. And then, on a quiet Tuesday morning, I went to the public library. I did not use my own computer. I did not use my own name. It's a ghost in the system. A concerned, anonymous citizen sat at a public terminal, the slow, clunky machine a world away from my sleek, modern laptop at home. And I began to write. I was not writing a review. I was writing a report. A formal, detailed, and utterly damning complaint to the one body in the city that Linda could not dismiss, could not ignore, and could not hang up on: the Chicago Department of Public Health. I addressed it not to the general complaints inbox, but directly to the man who was now the head of the Inspectional Services Division, a man who had once been my own, brilliant and deeply respected protege. The document I composed was a masterpiece of professional, bureaucratic, and deeply lethal prose. It was not emotional. It was not anecdotal. It was a cold, hard, and unimpeachable list of facts. Subject: urgent public health concern regarding Linda's kitchen. 1234 N. Dahmen Avenue, .2. The Director of Inspectional Services. This letter is being sent by a concerned citizen and a recent patron of the aforementioned establishment. I am writing to report a series of critical, observable violations of the Chicago Food Code, which I believe constitute an immediate and significant threat to the public health. I then proceeded, the meticulous, almost loving detail of a master craftsman, to build my case. I listed every single violation I had witnessed, not in the vague, emotional language of a customer, but in the precise, technical, and irrefutable language of the code itself. 1. Observed violation of Section T. Sen. Ba. Ling. E. Ling. A cross-contamination. On the evening of my visit, I personally witnessed a member of the kitchen staff utilizing the same pair of tongs to handle raw, uncooked poultry and subsequently a ready-to-eat cooked steak. The tongs were not cleaned and sanitized between these tasks. This constitutes a critical violation with a high risk of salmonella transmission. 2. Observed violation of Section 740060. Time temperature control for safety. The establishment operates a self-service salad bar. A spot check of a dairy-based dressing indicated a holding temperature of approximately 55 degrees Fahrenheit. Well, within the temperature danger zone, 41 degrees Fahrenheit, 135 degrees Fahrenheit, for the rapid proliferation of pathogenic bacteria. 3. Observed violation of Section 2 to 401.11. Hygienic practices. Multiple members of the waitstaff were observed wiping down tables and other surfaces with a soiled cloth. and then immediately handling clean glassware and silverware without a hand-washing step in between. A member of the kitchen staff was observed, touching his face and nose and then handling ready-to-eat salad greens without gloves or a hand-washing step. On and on it went. I listed the overcrowding in the dining room, a violation of the fire code. I listed the dim, inadequate lighting in the kitchen's prep areas, a violation of the physical facilities code. I listed a dozen other, smaller, but cumulative infractions. I had built a fortress of facts. A case so overwhelming, so detailed, and so professionally articulated that it could not and would not be ignored. I ended the letter with a single, powerful and utterly damning sentence. I am not a disgruntled customer. I am a citizen with over 30 years of professional experience in the field of public health, and it is my considered professional opinion that this establishment is operating with a gross and systemic disregard for the basic principles of food safety, and that it represents a clear and present danger to the health and well-being of its patrons. I signed it simply a concerned citizen. I sent the email from my anonymous account. I logged out. I wiped the computer's browser history. I walked out of the library, back into the bright, clear Chicago air, a profound and a deeply sorrowful sense of finality settling over me. I had done it. I had pulled the pin on the grenade. All that was left was to wait for the explosion. It took a week. I watched the local food blogs, the neighborhood Facebook groups. On a Tuesday, the first quiet tremor appeared. A post from a diner on a local foodie forum was heading to Linda's kitchen for lunch, and there's a big green license. Suspended sign on the door. Anyone know what happened? The next day, the official report was posted on the Chicago Department of Public Health's public, searchable online database. I sat at my own desk in my own quiet, sunlit study, and I read the official, public, and deeply satisfying obituary of my best friend's dream. The report was a thing of brutal, bureaucratic beauty. It was a 7-page document detailing the results of a surprise no-warning inspection conducted the previous Monday. It listed 22 violations. 12 of them were designated as serious. 6 of them were critical. My anonymous letter had not just prompted an inspection, it had triggered a full-scale top-to-bottom public health intervention. The report detailed in cold clinical language the findings of the inspectors. Critical violation: evidence of rodent infestation in the dry storage area. Critical violation: no certified food service sanitation manager on duty during hours of operation. Critical violation: dishwashing machine not reaching required sanitizing temperature. It was worse than I had even imagined. My own observations had just been the tip of the iceberg. The entire charming, rustic, and beautiful restaurant was a rotting, hollowed out, and deeply, profoundly dangerous façade. And at the very bottom of the report was the final, official, and devastating verdict. Establishment: Linda's Kitchen address, 1234 N Domino Vina result of inspection. Failed action, license suspended. Cease and desist order issued. I read the words and I felt no joy. I felt no triumphant, satisfying thrill of revenge. I just felt a profound and a deeply weary sadness. A sadness for my friend, a woman whose dream had been so big and whose competence had been so small. A sadness for our 50 years of friendship. A friendship that was now another casualty of her own, tragic and deeply, willfully ignorant. Pride. My revenge was complete. But it was not a revenge I had ever wanted. It had not been an act of anger. It had not been an act of jealousy. It had been from beginning to end a simple and a deeply painful act of my own unshakable and lifelong professional duty. I closed my laptop. The case was closed. And my conscience was at long last, and for the first time in a month, completely and utterly clear. A year is a long time. It is long enough for the white-hot inferno of a public business failure to cool into the gray. Settled ashes of a local cautionary tale. It is long enough for the raw, ragged wound of a shattered friendship to scar over, leaving behind a landscape of quiet, permanent change. In the year that followed the city's forced closure of Linda's kitchen, a new, more somber kind of quiet had settled into my life. The initial grim satisfaction of a public duty fulfilled had long since faded, replaced by the persistent, low-grade ache of a profound personal loss. I had been right. I had, in all likelihood, prevented a serious public health crisis. My actions had been logical, necessary, and from a professional standpoint, unimpeachable. But I had, in the process, destroyed my oldest and dearest friend. And the silence she had left in my life was a constant, mournful presence. I knew through the quiet, sorrowful reports of our mutual friends, the basic, brutal facts of her downfall. The health department's closure had been the final, fatal blow to a business that was already drowning in debt. The public humiliation had been absolute. The subsequent bankruptcy had been a slow, grinding, and deeply painful process. She had lost everything: the restaurant, her life savings, and, in the end, her house. The last I had heard, she and her husband had moved into a small, rented apartment on the far north side of the city, and Linda had taken a quiet, anonymous job to help make ends meet. She had, in effect, vanished from the world we had once shared. Our 50-year friendship, a vast, sprawling continent of shared memories and experiences, had been reduced to a single, unspoken, and seemingly permanent state of cold. Silent estrangement. I lived with the consequences of my actions. I had done what I believed to be my duty, and the cost of that duty had been my friend's dream. It was a heavy and a deeply uncomfortable moral calculus that I relitigated in the quiet, sleepless hours of the night. But I had also, in secret, been trying to mitigate the damage. A month after her bankruptcy was finalized, I had gone to my lawyer and, through a series of anonymous third-party trusts, had begun to send her money. It was not a grand gesture. It was a small, steady, and completely untraceable monthly stipend, a quiet act of penance, a secret. Anonymous attempt to offer a safety net to the friend whose own I had so spectacularly and so necessarily destroyed. It was the only thing I could do. A quiet, financial apology for a wound I knew could never be healed with words. I had assumed that this would be the final, quiet, and deeply unsatisfying chapter of our story. I had assumed I would never speak to Linda again. The universe, in its strange, and often its deeply ironic, wisdom had other plans. The encounter, when it happened, was not a dramatic, planned confrontation. It was a quiet, random, and deeply mundane accident. I was at a large, impersonal, and deeply uncharming big box grocery store on the far side of the city, a place I rarely frequented. I was there for the simple reason that they were the only store in Chicago that still carried a specific obscure brand of British marmalade that my husband, David, adored. I was in the checkout lane, my cart filled with a week's worth of groceries, my mind a million miles away, contemplating my dinner plans. And then I heard the voice. "Did you find everything you were looking for today, ma'am?" The voice was quiet, professional, and utterly, completely devoid of the warm, booming, and familiar laughter I had known my entire life. But it was her voice. I looked up, and there she was, Linda. She was sitting in the checkout lane, dressed in the crisp, clean, and deeply unflattering blue uniform of the grocery store. Her hair was pulled back in a neat, severe bun. Her face was thinner, the cheerful, rosy-cheeked optimism gone, replaced by a quiet, weary, and almost serene resignation. She was 56 years old, and she looked 66. But the frantic, desperate, and deeply stressed out, Energy that had surrounded her during the final chaotic months of her restaurant was gone. She looked calm. Our eyes met. And in that single, terrible, and deeply awkward moment, the entire 50-year history of our friendship, its beautiful, joyful beginning, and its ugly, brutal end, flashed between us. I saw a flicker of the old familiar pain in her eyes, a shadow of the anger of the betrayal. But then it was gone, replaced by a simple, profound, and deeply weary professionalism. "Maggie," she said, her voice a quiet, flat, and completely unreadable statement of fact. She did not smile. She did not scowl. She just acknowledged my presence. "Hello, Linda," I said, my own voice a dry, tight, and utterly inadequate whisper. The silence that followed was the most awkward and the most painful of my entire life. The young man in front of me finished paying for his groceries and left. It was my turn. I pushed my cart forward, and the quiet, mundane, and deeply surreal process of our final and most unexpected reunion began. She did not speak. She just, with a quiet and a deeply competent efficiency, began to scan my groceries. The beep of the scanner was the only sound between us, a steady, rhythmic, and deeply impersonal metronome, marking the time in our strange, new, and deeply uncomfortable reality. She scanned my organic kale. She scanned my husband's expensive imported coffee. She scanned the jar of the fancy British marmalade that had brought me to this place. This moment, I wanted to say something. I needed to say something. The words, the apology, the explanation, the 50 years of love and friendship, they were all a tangled, useless knot in my throat. Finally, as she scanned the last of my items, a simple, perfect bag of lemons, I found my voice. "Linda," I whispered, my voice a raw and a deeply pathetic sound. "I'm sorry." She did not look up. She just continued to scan the items, her expression a mask of pure professional neutrality. "For what?" she asked, her voice a quiet and a deeply tired murmur. "For everything I said, the tears I had been holding back for a year now, welling in my eyes. For the review, for the restaurant. For the pain I caused you." She finished scanning. She looked up at the small screen that displayed the total, $187.52. It read. She finally, and at long last, looked at me. Her eyes were not full of the anger or the hatred I had expected. They were just empty. The eyes of a woman who had been to war and had lost, and was now just tired. "You know, for the first 6 months after everything," she began, her voice a low and a strangely conversational tone, "I hated you. I have never in my entire life hated a human being the way I hated you. I would lie awake at night and I would just think of all the different ways I could hurt you, the way you had hurt me." She paused and her eyes drifted to the small, sad pile of my groceries on the conveyor belt. "I thought you were a monster," she continued. "A cold, bitter, and jealous woman who had never had a dream of her own, and so you had decided, out of pure, spiteful evil, to destroy mine." I just stood there, my own tears now streaming down my face, and I listened. I had been the judge, the jury, and the executioner in our last conversation. Now it was her turn. And then she said, her voice still quiet, "The bankruptcy happened. And the lawyers, they started to show me the books. The real books. The invoices I had never paid. The loans I had taken out. The numbers. My God, Maggie, the numbers." She shook her head, a small, almost imperceptible shudder. And I realized that the restaurant was already dead. It was a ghost. It was a failure, a catastrophic, and a deeply indebted failure, long before you ever set foot in it. She looked up at me again, and in her eyes I saw not hatred, not anger, but a new and a terrible and a deeply humbling clarity. "You didn't kill my dream." "Maggie," she said, her voice a whisper of pure, unadulterated, and hard-won. Truth, you signed the death certificate. And you saved me from myself. From a dream that was about to cost me not just my house, but my husband, my health, and my sanity. She took a deep, shuddering breath. You were not being my critic. You were being the only friend I had left, the only one who had the courage to tell me the truth. And I was too proud and too stupid and too scared to listen. The confession, the absolution, the one I had never expected, the one I had never asked for, hung in the air between us. I'm a good cashier, she said. A small, sad, and the first genuine smile I had seen from her in over a year, touching her lips. I'm on time, I'm polite. And my drawer is always balanced down to the penny. It's a simple job, an honest job. The transaction was complete. She had scanned my groceries. And she had, in the process, scanned our entire 50-year friendship, and she had, at last, and in the end, understood its true and its final value. There was no hug. There was no promise to call. The friendship, the one we had known, was gone forever. But in its place was something new, something quieter, something more honest, a new and a deeply somber respect. I paid for my groceries, and as I walked out of the bright, cold, and deeply impersonal grocery store, back into the warm and the forgiving afternoon sun, I looked back through the large plate glass window. I saw my old friend Linda, her face a mask of quiet, competent, and deeply dignified peace. As she greeted her next customer, my duty, my long, painful, and deeply complicated duty, was finally and truly over. I had not saved her dream, but I had, in the end, and against all odds, and at a terrible and unnecessary cost, saved my friend. And my conscience was, at long last and for all time, clear.